Now, for those in the very back, hear me okay? Thank you very much. The Conch tour train is owned by Historic Tours of America. We're the nation's storyteller. We also operate Old Town trolleys in Savannah, St. Augustine, Boston, Washington, D.C., San Diego, and Key West. You are now in the southernmost city in the continental United States. Key West is also the oldest city in South Florida. The oldest city in Florida, of course, is St. Augustine, which is 400 miles to the north. We're on the northern edge of the Caribbean Basin, spread out by the waters of the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic Ocean. We're actually closer to Cuba than we are to the mainland of Florida. In order to get back to the mainland, we cross 42 bridges in a car. Our island today is about 1.5 miles wide, nearly 4 miles long.
4 miles
long. In the early 1800s, it was only half the size it is today. And I'll tell you how the island grew later on during the tour. Now, as we go through town, you'll notice that the houses in the old town are built very close together, and some of the streets are very narrow. We'll be traveling close by parked cars and everything else outside the train. For your safety and comfort, please remain seated at all times. You don't want to take pictures. Please make sure the ropes at each and every seat are fastened. These ropes are just a reminder to keep all your body parts inside the train. There's no smoking on board the train, as this is public transportation. You may eat or drink anything non-alcoholic, as long as it's in a paper or plastic container. Now, the tour gets rather windy at times, and some roads are very bumpy. Please secure all loose articles at this time before we leave. If anything does get blown or bumped off the train, I'm not allowed by state law to stop and retrieve it for you, no matter how valuable it is, or no matter how long you've been married to it. Pushing is not fair. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I have some very important information for you. I need everyone's attention up here, please. This is a continuously narrated tour. So if you're going to speak to your neighbor, please be able to whisper as a courtesy to those around you. For the same reason, please turn off all cell phones at this time. We'll be making 3 stops during the tour. Our first stop will be about 45 minutes into the tour. We'll stop at our station for a 10-minute break. After the 10-minute break, you'll reboard this same train to continue on with the tour. Our second stop will be at Truman and Duval Streets. Now that's the stop if you want to get off the train and see the Hemingway House, the Lighthouse, the southernmost point, or the Butterfly Conservatory. You can do that. And our last stop will be in the historic Seaport area at a place called the Flagler Station. For those with yellow or green stickers, your tour ends to the right in Mallory Square next to the Shipwreck Museum. I'm going to get a quick head count now. As soon as we have the all aboard from MJ the conductor, we'll be on our way to the fine city of Key West.
Good evening. I'm delighted you could participate in our excursion. To avoid possible mayhem, please pay attention. Standing may cause vertigo. Don't do it. Keep your arms and legs inside so you don't fall out the window, especially the rear window. And finally, smoking and alcoholic beverages are strictly for the birds.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have the all aboard from MJ, so we'll be on our way. Have a nice afternoon, MJ. right corner, this white building was built in the early 1900s. In 1960, it became the Key West Art Gallery and features local artists. Next on the right behind the orange trolleys, is the aquarium. You can go to the aquarium and put a live shark. Next on the right, this tan and yellow building is building number 1. This was the very first building built on the Navy base, completed in 1852 by the Corps of Engineers. Ahead of us on the right, the big red brick building is the Customs House, built in 1891 in the Romanesque Revival style of architecture. And the sculpture in front of the Customs House of the couple dancing was done by J. Stewart Johnson, Jr. To the Customs House is known as the Museum of Art and History. On the far right corner, the tan building, is the Mel Fisher Treasure Exhibit. In 1622, the Spanish treasure galleons, the Atocha and the Santa Margarita, sank in a hurricane 30 miles west of us. More than 350 years later, in 1985, Mel Fisher and his crew found the motherlode of the Atocha and more than $400 million worth of treasure. Next on the right past this beige building, is a large water tank, or a cistern. This is a very important water tank to Key Westers. It used to belong to the Navy, but now we use it for our margaritas. Ahead of us on the right, the green gates are the presidential gates. Built in 1906, at one time they were only open for U.S. presidents. If you go through these gates and up 2 blocks, you can visit Harry Truman's little White House Museum, where our former president stayed during his 11 working holidays here in Key West. On the left is a huge banyan tree. The banyan tree has aerial or hanging roots. When the roots touch the ground, under the part of the tree, they form a new trunk. Ahead of us, on the far right corner, is the Key West Post Office, built in 1985. It was designed by a local architect named Sonny McCoy. This design is similar to 19th century federal buildings and keep with the historic guidelines that are in effect on the island today. On the far right corner is mile marker 0. This is the very beginning of Highway 1. Highway 1 ends 2,209 miles north of us at Fort Kent, Maine, right at the Canadian border. Now Highway 1 is also called the Overseas Highway between here and the Florida mainland. It's the longest overwater road in the world. So 120 miles from here to the Florida mainland. You have to cross 42 bridges to get there. The longest bridge is 7 miles long. That 7-mile bridge was in the movie True Lies with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jamie Lee Curtis. And now you can get a better with the mile marker 0 on the far right corner. Ahead of us on the right, there's the lavender house with purple shutters called the Francisco Marrero home. Marrero bribed his way out of the Cuban jail, moved to Key West, and by 1889, he was a very prosperous cigar manufacturer. When he died, his wife inherited the house and his fortune. But then his first wife from Havana showed up that nobody knew about. She claimed everything and she kicked the Key West wife out into the street, homeless and penniless. Now they say to this day the ghost of the Key West wife roams the halls of the mansion she lost. The Old Town area is a historic preservation district. It's one of the largest historic districts in the country.
Food Palace.
There are more than 3,000 structures in Old Town, and 10% are on the National Register of Historical Places. Well, on the far right corner is the Cafe Marquesa. The Marquesa is a brass plaque that is door indicating it is on the National Register of Historical Places. Ahead of us on the right next to the Marquesa, there's a gray house with dark green shutters. This is a classic revival style of house. You notice it has porches on both the first and second floors. Well, a variation of that is a Conch or Bahama style house that have porches that wrap around the buildings to help keep them cooler. The White House on the left corner and the two identical white houses on the far left corner are Conch or Bahama style houses. On the right is the Monroe County Library, established in 1892. This building was built in 1959 and is in a Bermudian style of architecture. Right next to the library on the right is a beautiful palm garden. They have 25 varieties of palms here from all over the Caribbean. Now oftentimes, with some of the smaller homes, additions were needed as families grew. Ahead of us, on the far left corner, the second house in the corner, right past this red convertible, which is the rear of the cottage, and the ridge line. It forms a zigzag pattern. These were very beneficial additions. The high peaks of the zigzag help trap hot air, while the low valleys made it much easier to collect into rainwater for drinking water. Ahead of us, on the far left corner, the two-story yellow building was a sponge warehouse in the 1850s. Key West became the main supplier of sponges in the country when in the 1850s sponge beds were discovered in our shallow waters. Men would go on small boats and pluck sponges from the bottom of the ocean using a long hook pole. Now in the early 1900s, great spongers came to Key West and they had diving suits. So they would actually walk across the bottom of the ocean collecting sponges by the basketful. And the locals thought that the great spongers were destroying the sponge beds, and a great deal of resentment built up between the two groups. But eventually, the great spongers moved on. So Key West was once again in control of the sponge beds until 1938, when a red tide caused a blight that destroyed most of the sponge beds. On the left, past this motorcycle, is a huge rubber tree. The rubber tree has aerial or hanging roots, just like the banyan tree. The rubber tree and the banyan tree are members of the ficus family of trees. Remote location, the military has always maintained a presence here. Straight ahead of us is Perry Court, military property since 1823. The U.S. Navy first made use of our deep water harbor in the 1820s to help control the pirates. In the Navy's been here ever since, from the 1820s to the present day. On the far right corner, the yellow building, is the armory, built in 1903. At the time, there was the only government building on the island made of wood. Now, this is unique because back then, federal standards were that all government buildings must be made out of either brick or stone. On the left, behind a white picket fence, is a cemetery for military personnel. Most were victims of diseases in the 1800s. Now, most of the graves here were moved to another cemetery in 1920, but in 1991, more graves were discovered, so the cemetery has been rededicated. Most houses in Old Town were built in the 1800s by ship's carpenters. The ship's carpenters were master craftsmen when they built their houses, the same way they did their ships. Snug and trim. They used mortise and tenon joints instead of nails so that the houses will give it sway in a high wind. Now, the ship's carpenters were not trained architects, but they skillfully combined architectural styles from all over the world. You may have noticed that most homes here are made of wood with tin roofs. In the early days, only source of drinking water was rainwater. Each house had a tin roof with a complete system of gutters that would lead to a single downspout, and from there to a cistern or cement holding tank. This is how we got our drinking water until the 1940s. In the 40s, during World War II, the Navy built a freshwater pipeline between here and the mainland, and that pipeline is still how we get our drinking water today. Now, the second reason for tin roofs is for fire protection. Unlike wooden shingles, tin prevents sparks from coming from roof to roof. Now, this is exactly what happened in the worst fire in King Latching Street during 1886. The fire started at 2 a.m. and burned for nearly 12 hours, destroying most of the downtown area. All people could do was go in small boats into the harbor and watch their town burn down. Needless to say, after the fire was the time of immense suffering, was thanks to a massive rebuilding effort. Key West did rebound. And ever since, there's been mandated that you must have a tin roof on your house if you live in Old Town. We're within a quiet zone, so to discuss the speakers, but I'll be right back with you.
Somebody with money complained about the noise.
We're now on Eisenhower Drive, named of course for President Dwight D. Eisenhower. But this road used to be called North Beach Road. Up to the left, there's the sandy beach, and then the ocean. This is where the island ended. 170 years ago, our island was only half the size it is today. So, everything to the right is Old Town, and everything to the left is New Town. And New Town was man-made by landfill projects, mostly after World War II. On the right corner is a statue of Jose Marti. Jose Marti was a revered hero in Cuba's fight against Spain for independence in the late 1800s. Jose Marti was a poet, a journalist, and a passionate, powerful speaker. Bayview Park is the largest park in the city, and it's called Bayview Park because it used to be on the bay before they made Newtown. Now in the 1890s, Eduardo H. Gatto, who was a very prosperous cigar manufacturer, owned all this land. That's now the park. And Gatto built a beautiful home here. In 1923, when the city bought the land for use as a park, they had no need for Gatto's house, so the house was put on wooden rollers, and it took 2 mules 2 weeks to move the house down the street 2 blocks to its present location. Ahead of us on the right, the 2-story light brown house with white shutters is Casa Gatto. It was built in the 1890s. We're about to turn onto White Street. In the 1940s, White Street was the outer boundary of the town. It was, and still is, a Cuban neighborhood. Coffee shops, restaurants, and bakeries. Now, Cuban coffee is quite a bit different from American coffee. It's very rich and strong. If you think black, is called Fuji. They'll keep you awake for 3 days. If you like milk and sugar, it's Cafe Con Leche. Ahead of us, on the far right corner, the yellow building is Glen Archer Elementary School. This was Key West's first high school, built in 1924. High school students built our mascot at our present high school on Flagler Avenue. It's a giant conch shell. You can't be in Key West for more than about 10 minutes without hearing the word conch. The original settlers from the Bahamas were called conchs. Their homes were conch houses. A conch is a sea animal that lives in a shell like this one that I'm holding. The meat is edible. You can make conch fritters, conch chowder, or conch salad. A conch is kind of like a giant snail. If you're born here, you're a conch. Once you live for 7 years, you become a fresh water conch. We also have very special sidewalks here in Key West. They're made of concrete. The high school football team are the Fighting Conchs, and the cheerleaders are the Conchettes. As you're about to see, straight ahead of us is 1927. The White Creek Fishing Pier, Mr. Mexico Fishing, and this is the sunrise. Ladies and gentlemen, by the 1850s, the slave trade had been outlawed. Now, obviously, slavery has been going on in the 1850s, but it wasn't only over for the Africans, Africa at that point. Well, in 1860, the U.S. Navy sent a slave ship that was on their way to Cuba. They arrested the ship captain, forced the ship to come to Key West, and they freed all the slaves. On the left is cement pillars with African carvings in them. There's a memorial to 295 of the freed slaves that died here in Key West shortly after they arrived. Next on the left, this red brick structure of the remains of West Martello Fort. This fort was built in 1861, but by the time it was finished, it was obsolete due to the invention of rifle cannon. Today, the fort is home to Key West Garden Club. On the left is Higgs Memorial Beach. There are several small beaches on this side of the island, and Higgs Beach is just one of them. Okay, I have a joke. Somewhere on the left, there are seagulls flying over the sea. Why do seagulls fly over the sea? Because if they flew over the bay, they'd be bagels. Back in 1893, Henry Flagler of the Florida East Coast Railroad between St. Augustine and Miami. Then in 1905, Flagler started on the overseas extension of his railroad to Key West. Now at the time, this was one of the greatest achievements of engineering. Most people alive back then thought it was impossible to build a railroad over so much open water, and they called the Flagler's Folly. The overseas railroad was 120 miles long. It crossed 37 miles of open water and connected the string of 29 islands to Key West. It cost Henry Flagler his own money to build the railroad. On January 22nd, 1912, Flagler rode the very first train into Key West. Thousands of people gathered to cheer him. Many had never even seen a railroad train before. At each stop along this railroad, Flagler built a luxury hotel for his passengers. On the left is his creation for Key West, Casa Marina, or House by the Sea. Hotel construction started in 1918, and the hotel opened New Year's Eve, 1920. On the roof of the hotel are handmade Cuban barrel tiles, and the exterior is imported German cement. In other words, this hotel is made of concrete. As you're about to see straight ahead of us once again is the Atlantic Ocean. You may have noticed the lack of big waves on our shores. All the big waves break on a coral reef, which is 5 miles offshore. It's the only living coral reef in North America, and it's just 200 miles from Miami to the Great Tortuga Islands. Now in the early 1800s, there were no navigational aids along the reef, so ships often ran aground there. Shipwrecks occurred as often as once a week. Whenever someone on the island spotted a wreck on the reef, the cry would go out, "Wreck ashore! Wreck ashore!" Now everybody, man, on the island was a wrecker back then, at least part-time, and they would rush out to the wreck to save the crew and the passengers and try to salvage the goods. Once the goods were salvaged, they would be auctioned off. Now back then, this is the main basis of our economy. About 1850, Key West was the richest per capita in the U.S. All thanks to the banking industry. Next on the left is one of the smallest beaches in Key West. It's called Dogs Beach. It's the only place in Key West where you can legally bring your dog to the beach.
Look at the Conch mobile. The Conch RV.
The very first European to ever see Key West back in 1513 was Ponce de Leon. Ponce de Leon actually never set foot on Key West, but he saw it from the ocean and he claimed it for Spain. Now, of course, the very earliest inhabitants of the Keys were the American Indians. But when the Spanish explorers who came after Ponce de Leon got here in the early 1500s, there were no Indians living here. There were Indian bones all over the island. So the Spanish thought that there must have been a big Indian battle here, and they named the island Cayo Hueso, or Bone Island. Well, about 100 years later, when the English came along, they corrupted Cayo Hueso into Key West. So Key West really means Bone Island.
We've stayed there. The southernmost motel, yeah.
Ahead of us, on the far left corner, is one of the most photographed houses on the island. It's called the original southernmost house. It was built in 1896 to the Queen Anne style of architecture, and it cost $250,000 to build this house. But that $250,000 from 1896 would be $6 million in today's money. And the house is even nicer on the inside than it is on the outside. On the left, right behind the tan wall, is the current southernmost house built in 1840 by Thelma Strable. Mrs. Strable wrote the book Read the Wild Wind about the shipwrecking industry. And now, on the left, there's
Look at the line to take a picture. Maybe we come back Monday.
The continental United States. We're now only 90 miles from Cuba, and we're 107 miles from Miami. We're further south than Brownsville, Texas, and we're 325 miles further south than Cairo, Egypt.
And I hate to say it, but looking at the sun, we probably need to be here, 11, no later than.
On the left, right behind the black bench, is U.S. Navy property. It's called the Sherman Annex. It's used for housing and communication center. The main naval base is on a little island called Boca Chica Key, which is 7 miles north of us.
I already have a picture, man.
And now you can get up to the entrance to the Sherman
That's
Annex.
cool. Where'd you get that at?
Here on the left.
It's shop. Okay.
You gotta get me one of them for my office.
No, I'm just gonna put it downstairs in my basement. My
For your office.
I know what temperature it is
Now,
downstairs.
what if they're watching this?
Ahead of us,
She
on
was
the right
kidding.
corner, there's a yellow building. But if you look over this yellow building, there's another yellow building behind it. It's a glass roof in the rear. This is a very interesting place to visit, the Key West Butterfly and Nature Conservatory. Inside this glass enclosure, there are hundreds of butterflies from all over the world. And in fact, there are so many butterflies in there that if you visit, you have to walk real slowly so you won't step on any butterflies. Ahead of us to the right, there's a white building with a navy blue awning called La Tida. La Tida is short for La Teresa di Marti, or in English, the Terrace of Marti. Jose Marti,
This looks just like
independent
the
street sheriff, back in 1893, from the second floor balcony. On the left, this whole area of town, back in the 1880s, was known as Gato Village. Eduardo H. Gato, the prosperous cigar manufacturer, built houses, grocery stores, a trolley line, and even churches and saloons for his workers. And there are many small villages on the island back then, but Gato Village became the largest of them, and it was the heart of the Kima community, and a bustling little city within a city.
There's a Circle K.
2003. Hard to find motorcycles. There's a barbecue grill, created in 1968.
We're now at the turn of the Whitehead Street. Whitehead Street is named for John Whitehead, a shipwreck survivor who came to Key West in 1818, brought here by the ship that rescued him. He stayed here on the island, and many years later, he became one of the early American owners of Key West. On the left, up above the treetops, is the Key West Lighthouse. The lighthouse was built in 1847. The original lighthouse was built in 1825, up at the southernmost point, but it was destroyed in a hurricane of 1846. So the city fathers thought it would be prudent to build a new lighthouse further inland. So the lighthouse is a museum. You can climb the 88 steps to the very top and get a great view of the island.
Been there, done that.
On the right behind the red brick wall, is the Ernest Hemingway House. The Hemingway House was built in 1851 by Asa Tift, a shipwreck captain. He built it in the French colonial style. It is the only French colonial house in Old Town. Ernest and Pauline Hemingway lived here in 1931 and lived here for nearly 10 years. In the 1850s, Sandy Cornish moved to Key West. Sandy Cornish was a former slave, and about his freedom from slavery in Maryland, and he moved down here, and he did very well here. Well, I have this on the left, is the Sandy Cornish Memorial AME Zion Church, established in 1865 by Sandy Cornish and Caroline Simmons. And the AME stands for African Methodist Episcopal. Ahead of us, on the right corner, there's a white and green building called the Green Parrot Bar. It's the very oldest bar in Key West, built in 1890. Now, back before it was a bar, it used to be a grocery store, and before that, it was a morgue. Now they say you can still get a cold, stiff one in here. On the left, about the center of this next block, the big red brick building is the Monroe County Courthouse, also built in 1890. Right in front of the courthouse and behind the end of the rainbow sign, the large tree is a weird looking trunk. There's a kapok tree. On the right corner, there's small bunker 0 again. There's the very end of Highway 1. Ahead of us on the right past this parking lot, house number 407, that's well over 100 years old. There's a small star just to the left of the front door of house 407. This small star is the award from the Oil and Restoration Foundation. You'll see houses all over Key West with those small stars on them, which means they're old historic homes that have been preserved or restored. And now, ladies and gentlemen, ahead of us on the right is the one, the only Marilyn Monroe.
She needs a pedicure.
Ahead of us on the far right corner is the little non-Catholic church in Florida. This St. Paul's Episcopal Church. It was established here in 1832. Now, this church building was built in 1919 as the fourth church structure on this site. It was damaged by fires or hurricanes. Ahead of us on the right, there's a gray house with lavender shutters, called the Duke of Auto Home. The auto home was built in 1890. It's in the Queen Anne style of architecture. It's also called the Artist House because Mr. Otto's son was an artist. This house was in the Otto family for almost 80 years. Ahead of us, on the far right corner, is a Spanish laurel tree. It has aerial or hanging roots, such as the banyan tree and the rubber tree. And next on the right is the Old Stone Church. Today it's called the United Methodist Church. We used to call it the Old Stone Church because the limestone walls are 2 feet thick, and it was built in 1877. Are your ears popping? Do you feel short of breath? We're now at the highest point in Key West. It's called Lawrence Hill, and it's an amazing 18 feet above sea level. On the right, house number 2, is the Octagon House. It was built in the 1880s. In the 1980s, Calvin Klein bought this house, and he restored it. Ahead of us, on the right corner, there's an orange house with green shutters called the Bahama House. This house was actually built in the Bahamas, and then it's one of the large, moved to Key West, and reassembled here in 1847. So this was actually an often back then, because in the 1800s, there were no trees in Key West, so wood was very hard to come by.
That sounded good.
Now in a moment, I'm going to show you an eyebrow house. The eyebrow house, the Key West invention. And the eyebrow house is ahead of us on the right. This is the one with the 4 flags on it. See how the roof comes down over the second floor windows? That's why it's called an eyebrow house. The idea was to shade the top floor from the sun. Most homes in this neighborhood were built in the 1870s and 1880s. There came a great prosperity on the island. And that prosperity continued until the 1930s, when of course the Great Depression struck. Key West was hit very hard by the Great Depression. We went from being one of the richest cities per capita in the U.S. to one of the poorest. More than 80% of the population went on to relief. The city went bankrupt, and we had to return the city charter back to the state government. The federal government administrator down here named Julius Stone. Mr. Stone is around, and he just said that Key West will make a great tourist mecca. So they started planting trees and shrubs. They started fixing up some of the old historic homes, and they planned a grand opening for Christmas of 1935. But then, on Labor Day of 1935, a terrible hurricane destroyed 70 miles north of us, destroying 40 miles of Fletcher's Railroad. So we're once again cut off from the mainland. But 3 years later, 1938, they built the Overseas Highway on top of Fletcher's Railroad foundation. So, without Henry Flagler and his railroad, the Overseas Highway that connects us to the mainland today most likely would have never been built. Many of the more stately homes have captain's walks on them, where shipwreck captains will stand and look for wrecks on the coral reef. Ahead of us on the left is the John Lowe Jr. House. It's kind of hard to see this house, but up on the left is a break in the palm trees, and if you look up, you can see the captain's walk on top of the John Lowe Jr. House. This is one of the finest homes in Key West, built in 1855. It's a Bahama-style house. Now the captain's walks were also called widow's walks. The shipwreck salvage business was a very dangerous business, and oftentimes men didn't return home alive. So their wives would stand up on the captain's walks and pray for their husband's safe return while searching the horizon for his ship. And ahead of us, on the far right corner, this yellow building also is the captain's or widow's walk up on top of it. So, as you turn right, if you look to your left, you can see the captain's walk on top of the yellow building.
Look at that tree.
Ahead of us on the right, these trees lining the street are silver buttonwood trees. And as you can see, the leaves are kind of silver looking. We're now on Simonton Street. It's named for John Simonton. He was the very first American owner of Key West. He bought in 1822 from Juan Pablo Salas for $2,000. Ladies and gentlemen, Ernest Hemingway first came to Key West in 1928. He came here by the Ford automobile. Well, when he got to the Ford, wasn't ready for him. It hadn't enough from Detroit yet. So, the Ford dealership put him into the Department of Bunker dealership for 6 weeks while waiting for his new Ford to get here. On the left, the base building with the brown balconies. It's called the Pelican Poop Shop today. But this used to be the Ford dealership. See these brown balconies on the second level? That's where Hemingway stayed for 6 weeks while waiting for his new Ford to get here. And during those 6 weeks, of course, Hemingway fell in love with Key West, which is why he moved here 2 years later. On the right is the federal courthouse. Built in 1931, it's made of the Keys limestone. Back in 1846, William Curry moved to Key West. William Curry was penniless when he first got here. But by 1860, Curry was Key West's first self-made millionaire. Well, ahead of us on the right, this red brick building is the William Curry & Sons Tobacco Warehouse. It was built in the 1850s. It's one of the very few downtown buildings that survived that terrible fire of 1886. On the left is Lorianne. How you doing, Lorianne? Ahead of us, on the right corner, is a yellow and green building called the Bowling Court. The Bowling Court was built in 1903 for Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola had one of their very first bowling plants here back then. Just like everybody else in town, they had a cistern for their water, and whenever the cistern ran dry, you have to wait till it rained again before you can bottle some more Coke. Now this building remained a bottling plant for Coca-Cola until the 1970s.
Yeah, big old boat.
We're within our station for our 10-minute break. After the 10-minute break, there's about 25 to 35 minutes left of the tour. We'll go up Duval Street, through Bahama Village, around more of the historic area, and by the old cemetery. We got some great cemetery stuff for you. Ahead of us on the right, this yellow building is our station. Inside of our station, there are clean restrooms, cold drinks, an ice cream parlor, and some great fudge. There's also a gift shop in here. Now, also inside of our station, there are many different souvenirs and books about Key West, including a photography book by yours truly. Watch your step as you disembark. It's a big step down. Please use the handrails and be very careful disembarking. If you have any questions, come on up. I'll try to answer your questions. We'll see you back here in about 10. This is up to I'd like to welcome everyone back. If we're missing anyone from your immediate party, please raise your hand. Would you like to be missing anyone from your immediate party? Yes, so please raise your hand. We'll be on our way for the last third of the tour.
We've lost a few people.
Ahead of us, on the far left corner, soon to be on the far right corner, this running yellow brick building was started in 1891 as a bank. To the balcony on the second level of the building. This balcony is made of solid mahogany. Took one man 5 years to carve this balcony. It took 20 hours to raise it up to the second level. He was the first civilian governor of Florida. Robert Ripley of the Liver Mountain fame took the longest street in the world. It goes from Gulf of Mexico behind us to the Atlantic Ocean in front of us. It takes about 20 minutes to walk all the way down to Duval Street. Left corner is the most famous bar in Key West. It's Sloppy Joe's Bar. This is Ernest Hemingway's bar. My fishing buddy, Sloppy Joe Russell. Left corner, behind all the umbrellas, the large gray house, Quarterly House, built in 1875. Governor John Quarterly was our mayor in the early 1900s. I have this on the left. Right past the Hard Rock Cafe. Library was established in 1915 to be the Key West Women's Club. On the right, the White House flying the American flag. It is the oldest house in Key West, built in 1829, which is a Wilmington and its 7 daughters. Ahead of us, on the right corner, the yellow house is the Bowling House built in 1842. Catholic Church in Rome, Florida. Ahead of us on the right is a very tall building with brown and white awnings from the Conch Hotel, built in 1926. Very tallest building in Old Town in 70-story time. Tennessee Williams stayed here in La Concha in 1947 while rewriting some of his way. The spring tour came to change in attitude. On the right, the light orange building is Jimmy Buffett's Margaritaville. Cuban patriots from the San Antonio Institute as a place that made and inspired the Cuban independence of Spain. On the right, the yellow building is the San Carlos, built in 1924. Home at Savannah City Hall. The second level of this grant, you know, so for the Coco startup architecture, you look at the birthday cake. On the left corner is the Pegasus Hotel, but in front of the Pegasus is actually around the corner to the left. So, that's the Catholic intersection. Coming behind you to the left, you'll see the very first Art Deco architecture built in Key West, Pegasus Hotel, built here in 1929. Ahead of us on the right, there's a yellow building called the Guild Home Gallery. It's a cooperative of many local artists and a great place to go and check out the local art. Left is the Wyland Gallery. Later on during the tour, I'll show you a mural of Wyland did recently. We're now crossing Angela Street in 1828 when the town first incorporated. Angela Street was the southern boundary of the town. These are the town limits. Here's the name behind us. They were originally arrested. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to turn up to Petronia Street. Now, as we turn right onto Petronia Street, if you look up to your right, right before we turn, but right now as we turn, you'll see an archway. We're going to pass the museum. This archway up here marks the beginning of Bahama Village. The Bahamians settled this area in the 1850s. They were into sponging, fishing, and wrecking industries, and many of their descendants still live and work here. And Bahama Village is the largest village in Old Town today. On the far left corner, soon to be on the right, is the entrance to Bahama Village Market. And now, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to get another picture of the Hemingway House or the White House, you're going to have your chance. The White House is now ahead of us on the right, which means, of course, the Hemingway House is over here on the left. Now, it's about 2 blocks from now, stop if you want to visit the Hemingway House and the lighthouse. So please stay seated for now. I can't let you off in the middle of the street. So, right here on the left, you get a great shot of the Hemingway House. This is where Hemingway did some of his best work, including The Snows of Kilimanjaro, A Farewell to Arms, To Have or Have Not, and For Whom the Bell Tolls. On the right corner is the Lighthouse Keeper's Quarters, built in 1877.
Hurricane destroyed it, 1845.
There are two front doors in the Lighthouse Keeper's Quarters, but it took two families to keep the lighthouse going. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the all aboard from Warren, so we'll be on our way. For those of you that just joined us, welcome on board the world famous Conch tour train.
Boobies, Bobby. Bobby, boobies.
We're now turning back onto Duval Street, but in just a moment, we'll be turning onto Truman Avenue, named of course for Harry S. Truman. Today Truman Avenue is part of Highway 1. It's the main road in and out of town. So in a moment, we'll be the overseas highway. Now earlier, I was talking about Henry Flagler, the man who built the overseas railroad. Well, everyone's heard of Rockefeller, very few people heard of Flagler. Rockefeller and Flagler were partners, in fact. According to Rockefeller, Standard Oil was Flagler's idea. Today, of course, Standard Oil is ExxonMobil. So that's how Flagler made all his millions to build the overseas railroad with. Flagler wasn't born rich. He was a self-made millionaire. Now, without Henry Flagler, the overseas highway most likely would have never been built, because it was built on his railroad foundations back in 1938. Most people think it must get very hot here in the summertime, at least hotter than it is on the mainland. But that's not really true. The highest temperature ever recorded in Key West was 97 degrees. That was with the trade winds to help keep us cooler. These same trade winds, along with the warm waters of the Gulf Stream, also keep us warmer in the wintertime. The lowest temperature ever recorded here was 41 degrees. But usually in the wintertime, from the 70s and the 80s, all the way along. This last Christmas, on Christmas Day, it was 77 degrees in Key West.
Okay, so we found out where we need to live now.
I have the price, right behind the stone wall, is the property of St. Mary's Star of the Sea Catholic Church. St. Mary's Key West, established here in 1855. Now the actual church building of St. Mary's is ahead of us on the right corner. This church building we're going to see was built in 1905. So, if you look to your right, you notice St. Mary's has twin steeples.
women need jobs.
Ahead of us on the left is the Key West Cemetery. This cemetery was established here in 1847. The original cemetery was down by the southernmost point, but it was destroyed in the hurricane of 1846. So the city fathers thought it would be prudent to put the new cemetery further inland, and they put it right here in the dead center of town. As you can see, many graves are above ground. There's a very simple reason for this. Key West is a very small island, only 1.5 miles by 4 miles. So once the cemetery was full, there was no land available for a second cemetery. So they started putting their graves above ground. Many of the epitaphs in this cemetery mark Key Wester's odd sense of humor. There's one epitaph for Betty B. Roberts. She was a hypochondriac, as she had written on her gravestone. See, I told you I was sick. In the 1850s, fancy scroll trim work called gingerbread got very popular here in Key West. First, the gingerbread was hand-carved by the ship's carpenters. Well, in one moment, I'm going to show you a gingerbread house. Now, this is a very unique house. You don't want to miss it. On the left, the second house past this white building is the yellow house. And it has everyone's favorite gingerbread man gingerbread on the roof line. We're about to enter another quiet zone, so I need to set the speakers again, but I'll be right back with you. Ahead of us, on the far right corner, there's a two-story white house built in 1891 by Benito Alfonso. Alfonso was a strong supporter of Cuba's fight against Spain for independence in the late 1800s, and he sold himself in 1906 to Antonio Diaz y Carrasco. Senor Carrasco was the very first Cuban consul to the United States, and he has consul offices here in this house. Cuba won its independence from Spain in 1903, so actually Senor Carrasco became a great hero to the Cuban community here in Key West. Now as you pass this house on the far right corner, if you look up to the second level of it, it has very intricate shift wheel gingerbread up there. And this ship wheel gingerbread was hand carved by the ship's carpenters. We're about to turn left. The road that we're turning onto gets very bumpy. You know, the condition of the road, it's not my fault, and it's certainly not your fault. It's the balls. On the far right corner is a statue of Henry Flagler, the man who built the Overseas Railroad. Speaking of Flagler, we're presenting our Flagler Station. Now you can disembark here if you want to visit the Henry Flagler Railroad Museum. This little white building here on the right. So if you want to do that, you can. You get your later train to finish out the tour. But we're going to take us away from Mallory Square at the end of our tour. Now once again, ladies and gentlemen, this is a very brief stop. We'll be for a few seconds to see if KP has everybody new for us, then we'll keep going. All aboard from KP. Have a wonderful afternoon, boss. I will, thank you. Snoopy on the right from the yellow building, is a bust of Henry Flagler, the man who built the Overseas Railroad. Straight ahead of us is the Key West Bight. It is B-I-G-H-T, a bight with a body of water surrounded and also one by land, which makes it a very safe harbor. And as you're about to see, there are some very nice boats in the Key West Bight.
There's the half shell raw bar.
Next on the right, took this old rusty pickup truck. This whole area to the right is called the historic seaport area. There were tons of goods transported, but excellent were daily in the 1800s. About 10 kilos of stone across the Caribbean, the gateway, the Panama Canal, and South America. On the right, is a mural. 1 year ago, an artist named Wyland came down here and painted this mural.
There's
As
our
you
hotel.
can see, the mural goes all the way around the building. And next on the right, at the very end of this little road, is a boat called the Schooner, the Western Union. The Western Union was built in 1939. It's the only wood to hold schooner left on the island. After it was built, it was leased to the Western Union to maintain the cable between here and Havana. On the left corner, there's a little rusty pickup truck. And ahead of us, on the far left corner, for some unknown reason, this building is called the Red Doors. It was built in 1868 as a cigar factory. But in the 1950s, the Red Doors was a bar, and it was called the Bucket of Blood. It was one of the roughest bars on the Gulf Coast.
Caroline Street Market.
We're now on Caroline Street. In the 1950s, Caroline Street was a rough, spotty part of town. You did not want to come here after dark back then. Jimmy Buffett wrote a song about it. There's a woman going crazy on Caroline Street, stopping everywhere that she does meet, saying if you'll be gentle, if you'll be sweet, I'll show you my place on Caroline Street. Ahead of us, on the right corner, there's an unpainted house with dark green shutters called the Cypress House, built in 1888. Now the original Cypress House burned down in that triple fire of 1886, but this house here on the right is an exact replica of the original one, except it's not made of cypress, it's made of termite resistant pine, and the name Cypress House simply stuck. Also, the Cypress House is a 3-story eyebrow house. If you look at the top of it, you notice the roof comes down over the 3rd floor windows. Now this is unique because most of the eyebrow houses in Old Town are 2-story. Ahead of us on the left, right in the center of this next block, is the George Patterson house. Patterson was our DA in the 1880s, and he built this house in 1887. And as you can see, there are some nice balconies on the Patterson house. On the right is the Curry Mansion. This is the home of William Curry, the first self-made millionaire in Key West. Ahead of us, on the far left corner, is the Porter house. In 1838, home of the Porter family, and still one of them to today, after 7 generations.
I hear a bull.
Ahead of us on the left, the light green house, flying the American flag. If you look to the left, the front door of this light green house, you'll see an old pirate's well there. This well was actually built by pirates in the 1700s.
Oh, look at that. A party.
On the left corner, the birthplace of Pan Am. Pan American Airways have their very first ticket out in 1927.
They're all dressed for the pub crawl.
Oh, that's right.
That's the reason they're all dressed up early. That's it. I forgot.
Oh, so the pub crawl is like a thing.
On the right, there's some more gingerbread. Right behind this white vehicle, or right behind these two vehicles on the right, is a fence with liquor bottle and heart-shaped gingerbread. On the right corner is the John James Audubon House, built in 1830, making it the second oldest house in Key West. In 1832, it was named in honor of John James Audubon, a famous naturalist, when he came here to paint the birds of Key West. And there are still many paintings inside the Audubon House.
I was thinking they're getting into St. Patty's Day early. Yeah.
Straight ahead of us, to the left, is a tall wooden tower. This tall tower for the Shipwreck Museum. Detailed all over the shipwreck saw the date of the 1800s. And you climb this tall tower, you get a great view of the island. For those of you that just joined us, the next train is right here on the left, train number 106. So in a moment you get on my train, you get a train number 106 right here on the left. Train building. On the left is Mallory Square. It's named for Stephen Mallory, who was a shipbuilder in Key West back in the 1880s. Now, ladies and gentlemen, every night we have the sunset celebration. So the sun sets at about 7:30. And the sunset celebration takes place straight ahead of us on Mallory Dock. Now, if you need a map, I have a good map available. It's complimentary. It has through the directions I'm going to show you, and that you can visit. And also, as I mentioned earlier, I have these Conch train souvenirs, just like this one for everybody on the train. On the far right corner is the Key West Sculpture Garden. Here they have busts of many of the early settlers and their stories. And ahead of us on the right are two of the oldest commercial buildings in Key West. The Shell Warehouse. Past the Shell Warehouse is the Sponge Market. You can see sponges that come from the bottom of the ocean. You've been a very good audience, so I sure appreciate it. Watch your step as you disembark. And everyone come on up, get a map and a Conch train souvenir. And there's the national anthem of Key West.